brief introduction to myself. I'm Alan Fyall. I'm the Associate Dean at the Rosen College in a freezing Orlando, Florida. And this is the first time we've partnered with the University of Surrey, which is possibly warmer than us today. It's a really important event. This is something that we've been speaking about for a while. I would love to take the credit, but I can't really. It's really my colleague, Jessica Wickey at UCF and Mike Dugnan in Surrey. But this is a big step for the Rosen College. The Rosen College traditionally has had a very, very good track record of management research, operational research. This is the sort of social justice agenda is really something which has been growing over the past couple of years, really in response to some sort of serious issues and serious questions in this part of the world, and obviously things that are going elsewhere. And I think it's fair to say that we chose the first session for human trafficking, but it's really been something that the college and many colleagues, so this isn't just one or two colleagues, many colleagues have been actively involved with in recent years. And Jessica, when she comes on in a few minutes, will shed light on all our students go through extensive training now. So we have about 3,500 students. This is core activity. So it's a huge step as far as the college is concerned. Anyway, I'm going to introduce you to Mike Dugnan, who's really the brains behind this series. Mike's at the University of Surrey, just down the road in Guildford. But Mike, if you can just introduce you and your team and how this came about, and then we can get the show on the road. But thank you very much for the invitation.
Thanks all for coming. So I'm Mike Dignan. I'm head of Department of Events at the University of Surrey. And I also direct a research centre called the Observatory for Human Rights and Major Events. And really just building on what Alan said around kind of why we're doing this social justice agenda, it really responds to what is becoming a kind of a global appeal across all kind of large scale event owners. So the IOC, UEFA, FIFA, Commonwealth Games, they're all taking human rights and community rights very, very seriously. And that's really because all of the iterations of their events, so Tokyo 2020 to Beijing 2022 to FIFA and the continued event series that we see all across the world, all of them are embedding the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals in terms of their operational delivery of their events. And the next kind of natural progression from that, if we're thinking about creating sustainable communities and communities and cities and protecting people's rights and as citizens, but residents and businesses, the next kind of stage and evolution of that has been this question about human rights. And when we look at Qatar 2022, we see that 6,500 people have died in the construction of kind of the infrastructure and the venues and that sort of thing. It brings that much more to the fore. So that's the reason why for our events program, particularly at Surrey, we want the students certainly to know how to develop and deliver exceptionally good events that are transformative experiences for people that go to them, but also think about those things that are kind of less visible, that are outside, both inside the destination, but also across the supply chains as well that prop up this particular industry. So that's the kind of stuff that we're doing. So me and Alan have a chat with Jessica. Both institutions are doing quite a lot in terms of human rights and trafficking and that sort of thing. So that's the inspiration really behind that. So really that's just where we are. Yeah.
Mike, just before introducing Jessica, can I just run through? So this is the first of 4 events, and we split them basically. We split them in 2, but we split them on those themes that are more relevant to each destination. So we've got the issue of human trafficking today, and we've got our guest that we'll introduce in a moment. We've then got the diversity and inclusion event, which is a Surrey lead on February the 23rd. We've then got something very close to our hearts here because it's literally next door, the issue of accessibility for the Special Olympics 2022 USA Games, which is going to be the largest ever learning disability event in the state of Florida. We've got about 15,000 athletes coming it's actually located just down the road at Disney, but in the city of Orlando as well. So huge event for us in June 22. And then finally, we've got the Qatar, or CADA, as they say here, Mike, the CADA 2022 World Cup. and the issue of migrant labor. So all very, very relevant issues to the areas concerned. So on that note, Jessica, can you maybe introduce yourself and the work that essentially you and your team have pioneered here with Tomas and Alan and the team, and introduce how it's become such an integral part of the Rosen College?
Yes, thank you so much. And so I'm very excited that we're putting together this series. For everyone who doesn't know me, my name is Jessica Wickey. I'm a faculty member here at the UCF Rosen College in the Tourism Events and Attractions faculty. I'm also the director of our internship program. So we get the opportunity to lead all of our students in their future careers by getting great internships. And that's how we started the conversation of looking at trafficking and hospitality and tourism. We invited Tomas and his team from United Abolitionists, who you'll meet just 1 minute, Dr. Anthony Davis, who's part of their team, and retired Corporal Alan Wilkett, who I'll introduce in just a minute, as part of the team. Well, we invited Tomas and his team and some other team members to come in and talk to our students about human trafficking in the hospitality and tourism industry. I had worked 25 years in lodging, events and entertainment, and food and beverage, and I had no idea about some of these identifying factors. So we thought we need to bring in the experts and talk to our students. So in the spring of 2019, we invited 200 students in to attend a workshop. Out of that workshop, 30 students stood up at the end and said, after I've learned these identifying factors, I think I might have witnessed trafficking in my workplace. One student stayed behind at the end and said, I think I'm about to be trafficked after learning this information. So I see some of your faces. Yes, Jordan, I agreed. That was my face. I said, what the what? What is going on? And so we said, we have to do something about this. So my colleague, Professor Canova, and I, we went to the dean, put together an idea to start human trafficking curriculum in education so that all 3,000 of our undergraduate students would leave the Rosen College with the ability to identify and report trafficking in their workplace. These are our future directors of operations at airports, destination management companies, event companies. They're the future general managers of hotel and lodging. They will be able to identify and report. They will be able to train their teams to identify and report to help to end human trafficking. And so we're very passionate about it here at the Rosen College. We have all of our students have to go through 3 internship courses over 3 separate semesters. Embedded in their course is a module that they'll learn about trafficking, identifying trafficking factors, the different segments of trafficking, the financial and psychological impacts, and how to report and identify trafficking. And that happens over 3 semesters. So when they leave here, they are equipped with the ability to identify and report trafficking. And I see my colleague Giselle Canova, Professor Canova, give a wave. It's because of her hard work and together that we were able to implement this with the help of Tomas Lares and his team and Alan Wilkett. So with that, I'd love to introduce my friend, my partner in the fight, retired Corporal Alan Wilkett.
Hey, wherever you're at, it's good morning still here. So from Tampa, Florida, which is freezing, as well as Orlando. And then I'm driving to Orlando here in just a little bit, but yes, freezing here. First of all, just a quick introduction. My name is Alan Wilkett. I have about 27 years of law enforcement. I retired a little over a year ago and continue in the fight of anti-human trafficking work. The last several years of my law enforcement career, I directly worked in the fight to combat human trafficking here in the States, particularly in Florida, but also nationally. So what does it look like, human trafficking, the fight against human trafficking here in the United States, and particularly here in the Florida area? A couple of things that Jessica just mentioned, and by the way, it's just an honor to work with Jessica and Alan and the team that I've had an opportunity to interact with from the Rosen College, and it's just been amazing. And let me just make a brief statement about those of you that are on the call that work in the hospitality industry and the critical role that you play. In my work in investigating human trafficking, look, I have witnessed probably some of the most diabolical incidents that you can even imagine. I have held in my hands some of the most broken people in the world. I have carried them out of hotels. I have carried them out of restaurants. I have carried them out of brothels. and you see the brokenness in their lives, and you realize that we have to really attack this on those frontline sides. And one of the biggest front lines that we're looking at is obviously the hospitality industry, whether it be surrounding large scale events like Super Bowls. We've had the last 2 Super Bowls here in the United States, has been in the Florida area. We had Miami and then we had Tampa, whether it's large scale conventions. So law enforcement plays a key role in attacking human trafficking, but I would submit to you that a larger role than what law enforcement plays is frontline workers that are working in those high vulnerable institutions, whether it be the hospitality industry, convenience stores, high traffic corridors, on and on and on. So you are a frontline, and that frontline must be equipped to fight this fight if we're going to end human trafficking. Thank you for allowing me to be here today.
Thank you so much, Alan, and we're very excited you'll be here. And Alan has so much great information from his work with combating trafficking. And I also see we had Tomas Lares, who's president and founder of United Abolitionists, to join us, but it's National Human Trafficking Awareness Week. He got pulled away on an emergency. And so he sent in his director of training, also a board member as part of his board of directors, Dr. Anthony Davis. Dr. Davis, thanks for joining us at the last minute. Can you tell us a little bit about what United Abolitionists does and how you got in this fight as well?
United Abolitionists. Hey, well, first of all, welcome everybody and thank you. United Abolitionists is an organization that started out as Florida Abolitionists, and our main goal was to rescue and restore victims of human trafficking and to do all we can to provide any necessary services to assist them, and also to provide other information to law enforcement so that they can successfully work with the district attorneys to prosecute these cases. We've become and evolved and become United Abolitionists because we've done so many things universally throughout the United States. And our collaborative effort has brought in agencies from the federal level all the way down to the city to foreign investigative units. And so now we're looking at primarily really working on training and building that information component to all types of agencies across the United States, be it in law enforcement, be it in NGOs, be it in corporate, working with their social responsibilities. These are the type of efforts that we work closely with Valencia College to establish the curriculum for teaching human trafficking, as we know how bad it affects the hospitality industry.
Thank you so much, Dr. Davis, and thanks for joining us. So let's go ahead and get started, Alan. Let's move the itinerary around just a little bit. We were going to talk a little bit about the paper some research we're doing about mega events, but let's jump right into the questions and really get to the meat of it, and then we'll kind of close out with kind of some current research. So would you like to take it away as the moderator, sir?
Yeah, certainly. And Jessica, and I think just for everybody's benefit, I'm going to repeat the numbers. So Jessica, if you mentioned a few minutes ago, there was 200 students in a class. Of that 200, 30, I think you said, had a feeling they had been or were possibly under the pressure of trafficking, and 1 student had actually been trafficked. In addition, Jessica, if you remember, about 2 weeks after you made that statement, one of our faculty members stood up very bravely in a open meeting and explained how about a week after you'd said those numbers, his daughter had experienced trafficking in part of Orlando. And I just remember it was a very, very emotional outpouring. And I think that was the moment when we all realized this isn't just something you read about in a paper, it's very, very, very real. And I know for me, I had no idea of the scale and the sort of depravity of what's going on. So, Alan, the world that you're in, it's a tough world. But I think those numbers were the wake-up call for us to realize this is something, as a good citizen to the hospitality industry here, we really had to dive into much deeper. So no, it was one of those wake-up moments. One could argue we should have woken up before, but I say better late than never. So no, definitely one of those moments. So Alan, I'm going to come to you first. Yeah, sorry about the Buccaneers at the weekend, but these things happen. What does sort of sex or sort of labor trafficking look like at a major event. You know, most of the students, faculty on this call, they're interested in event management, mega event organization, etc. What is the world of trafficking and major mega events? Where do they collide? The positives, negatives, etc.
So thank you for the question, and also for throwing me off my game by mentioning the Buccaneers.
Yeah, sorry about that.
So when we talk about trafficking, I think the first thing we have to look at is what kind of those pull factors in. And of course, we know that this is the exploitation of vulnerabilities. So when you have vulnerabilities that an individual has, then the trafficker becomes really good at exploiting those particular vulnerabilities. And then what does it look like when you start pulling those into kind of your major events? I can tell you that if we're working conventions or if we're working Super Bowls, on the sex trafficking side, we're really kind of looking at what sex work looks like. So you're having large groups of people that are coming into a concentrated area, and you usually have your pimps or your traffickers who will bring their stables, as they call them. So they'll bring their stables into that same area to, and I'm going to use a term that kind of is an internal term, but to service those that came in. The party atmosphere, the attitude that whatever happens there is going to kind of stay there. I can go and I'm going to use a quote, let my hair down, and I can just go and party and nobody's going to really care. So the trafficker will bring their stables in. And what we have seen is there's always emerging trends. And I have a whole presentation on just what the emerging trends look like. Back a few years ago, we were looking at kind of traditional prostitution models. And what do I mean by that? What I mean by that is the kind of brothels that were being set up at hotels, or brothels that would be set up at vacation rental homes. So you would have kind of that, what we would call kind of a traditional model of a brothel that would service. What we're seeing though is emerging is we're seeing a lot of online purchases. So the purchases are beginning to happen online. So they will set up websites, and these websites will advertise these young women, young men, older women. They will advertise them like products. We see it happening through dating websites, but in particular, we're seeing it through dedicated websites that they will advertise for sale human beings to be bought and sold for sexual favors, for sexual activity. So we're seeing a real movement. Most of the statistics that we're seeing now is about 60% is starting to happen online. So that's been a big movement rather than the old street tracks or brothels of kind of the old model. So we have some of these emerging trends that are happening. So we're looking for those. Some of the things that we look for, and I'm just going to mention a couple of those. Branding is really big. So we start looking at branding, which will be typically a tattoo that kind of advertises the pimp's name. If we see several young ladies or young men that have the same tattoo, that could be a sign that it's a brand. But we're also looking at an emerging trend there, which is what we call soft branding, which is going to be bracelets and necklaces. So you see that kind of sex trafficking is emerging from kind of that old traditional model, and we're seeing it. Now, what about labor trafficking? Labor trafficking is going to happen in those service industries. And a lot of times it's down chain. So when you look at down chain or downstream, you're starting to look at those service industries such as landscaping, window cleaning, restaurants, hotels that may bring in contract services to kind of supplement that large influx of crowds that's coming in. I will give you a case in point. We had a restaurant that we got a call to around the Super Bowl that was bringing in foreign workers to kind of help with the influx of additional people coming in. Turned out to be a 14-year-old boy from Guatemala who was having to work all night long in a restaurant, hidden from sight during the day when customers were in there. And we had to rescue this and recover this 14-year-old boy from Guatemala who was working 14, 16 hours a day in the kitchen doing work that was unbelievable and just being taken advantage of and being paid nothing. So that was a recovery that would happen. So you see that service industry in particular has the influx of workers coming in. So you'll see labor trafficking around those service industries. Sex trafficking is moving from a brothel model. In Tampa, we had to really work the marinas. We had to work the RV parks because now they're renting RVs and bringing them in, setting up mobile brothels, and they'll move them every 2 to 3 days. So that's kind of the areas that we're looking at and what it looks like around these large scale events.
And I guess, Alan, just before I go to Anthony, is the challenge for law enforcement can you keep up, I guess, with the technological advances?
And the answer to that is no.
Yeah.
And I know that sounds terrible. And it's not the answer that everybody expected, I'm sure, because you'd like for me to say, oh, yes, law enforcement is way ahead of the curve. The fact of the matter is law enforcement as an industry per se is really reactionary. So we're kind of reacting to what happens out there on the street. Do you know the ones, in my view, that can really get ahead of the curve is the ones on this call? Because the training of what indicators and behaviors and characteristics look like, having well-trained observers within industries that are frontline, they're the ones that will stay ahead of the curve and then make the call so that law enforcement can react to that.
Okay, thanks, Alan. Anthony, Dr. Davis, are your views pretty similar, or how do you see things?
I see them as pretty much similar. There's not a lot to add. I mean, Corporal Wickett has really hit the nail on the head in terms of the things that we've seen and experienced and what needs to be done to try to get things back where they need to be.
And I guess the question, and Jessica, you may want to chip in as well here. So it's not so much the mega events the problem, it's the fact it's just a magnet for people.
It is. It's a magnet for people, and what it does is it brings everyone together in sort of like, if you look at and envision a funnel, it brings everybody together in an event funnel. And so you look at, we have the traffickers. Actually, I'd like to share something with y'all real quick. So if you look at the event funnel ideology, it represents that you have the event managers, the organizers of the mega events, in which the traffickers should be profiled on. Then we have basically the victims, right? And then we have the traffickers. So we have those three: the event organizers, the traffickers, and the victims. And all three have to be there to make it happen. And so what happens is exactly what Corporal Wilkett said, is these traffickers attract vulnerable populations. And when attendees are coming to these mega events, they're looking for possibly an exciting thing to add to their event. You're coming to the Super Bowl, you're coming to MegaCon, you're coming to a concert, something exciting. You've now put on your party hat, right? And you're ready to do some exciting things. So what we found through research was that a lot of times people will make bad decisions. They don't understand that what they are doing there has consequences. What they are doing there affects what will happen next in their lives. And that often they don't see the sex trafficking, if they're purchasing for sex, they don't see that individual as being trafficked. They see it as a service that happens to come with this mega event. And so as what Corporal Wilkett was saying that, and so it's something that we need to do as a community is we have to identify and work together to make system-wide policies so that everyone is educated on training. The event managers that are planning the events know about trafficking. There's posters and advertisements through the entire registration process and during the event, at the event, and post-event about we do not allow trafficking. So there's ways that we can work together, and I'll talk a little bit more at the end of the call about that. But yes, there's definitely identifying factors. One thing I want to say before we go to the next question is it's really important, and Corporal Wilkett can give a lot more information on this, but the #1 recruitment tool that recruiters use to recruit victims is Facebook. That has been that way. That's according to the Metropolitan Bureau of Investigation in Orange County, the #1. Now moving forward, recruiters, I call them recruiters, traffickers are trafficking young individuals through gaming systems. So they're gathering. Can you talk real quick before we go to the next question about that, Corporal Wilkett?
Sure, and thank you for saying that, Jessica. And I apologize if I take way too much time, and I'll just apologize in advance, and then I'm not going to apologize anymore. There is, just so that everybody it kind of gets a visual. We look at human trafficking in a triangle. So when we look at what we call the human trafficking triangle, what it says is there are three parts to human trafficking, three actors that are involved in human trafficking. One of those is the victim. They make up one side of the triangle. The other side is the trafficker, the pimp, the one who facilitates the trafficking. And then you have the buyer. They make up the three sides of that triangle. And obviously, all of us on this call are already aware that the key to really kind of collapsing human trafficking is to take the buyer out, because they produce the demand, they produce the money into the market. And so obviously collapsing human trafficking requires a real demand reduction strategy. And there'll be a big conversation on what demand reduction. But when you look at how do we get that victim side of the triangle into it, and if I had time, I would talk about how that the trafficker may not be an individual. The trafficker that we're finding here in the United States, with obviously with the lawsuit against Twitter, for instance, that we have going on by Nkosi, we're seeing that even big tech can play the role of trafficker. It doesn't have to be an individual. It's who's facilitating that, allowing that to happen, who's creating the marketplace for that transaction to take place. What Jessica was talking about is there's 4 stages to human trafficking. There's recruiting, grooming, trafficking, and then there's that facilitation or the immersion side of that. Those are the 4 stages of human trafficking. When you look at recruiting and grooming, how are they recruiting them in? Well, Jessica mentioned social media, Facebook being huge. In fact, the cyber tip line last year here in the United States, is run by NCMEC, had over 21 million reports of CSAM, which is child sexual abuse material, had over 21 million reports to a cyber tip line in 1 year. And Facebook had over 20 million. One single platform, but at least they're reporting. And so I applaud them for at least reporting the CSAM, but you can see how big that marketplace is. But as Jessica said, what we're seeing is we're seeing a movement to apps. Apps are huge. Apps are huge recruiting and grooming tools. And then the gaming systems, Xbox Ones, PlayStations. If it has a chat feature inside the game, you'll start seeing the recruiting and the grooming through the chatting of our children through the chat feature. And then they'll want them to move to an encrypted messaging system like Wickr or Kik, or one of those messaging systems to continue that grooming process. And then of course, get them into the trafficking. So gaming systems, social media, and apps are what I call the triangle of recruitment, because that's where they're recruiting our kids, and these victims are being recruited through there.
I'm so glad you brought that up. Just to wrap that end thing about recruiting, you guys, this trafficker's #1 job is to sell a person. That is their only job. It is a $150 billion industry, the largest growing criminal industry behind drug trafficking. So that is their only job, and they will take up to a year to groom a young individual. So they will try to befriend them on these platforms, on these gaming platforms, and these young people, and groom them. And it's their entire job. And they can take their time for a year to groom these kids. And so I know we're talking about events and mega events, but I just want to be crystal clear on that. So if you have friends and family, young sisters, young brothers, young children, watch what they are doing. I just wanted to put that out there as a PSA as well. So
yeah,
thank
no,
you.
Jessica, I'm glad you said that, because certainly when you first introduced all the issue to me, that as a parent, you clearly think that you start taking these things far more seriously. And I guess Alan and everyone really, it's 2022. One would think these things don't happen anymore, but in many ways, it seems that the facilitation of the technology is probably even a greater problem that it's been in the past. Is that a fair assessment?
Not only is it fair, it's actually supported by the data that we're starting to gather. Polaris Project has reported a 40% increase to the call to the National Human Trafficking Hotline after COVID started. Why? Because people were driven inside and driven on digital devices. So now the digital world is really becoming the preferred place for both the recruitment, the grooming, and the trafficking, by the way. So making the arrangements for that trafficking event to happen, whether it be on the sex trafficking or the labor trafficking side. So they're making the arrangements to come to the hotel. They're making the arrangement to come meet at that large scale event or at a restaurant, and that's all being done online. So yeah, Polaris Project, I thought that was a telling thing that they're reporting a 40% increase after COVID hit because of the driving to that digital platform and what people perceive to be, and it's not necessarily true, but they perceive to be the anonymity of a digital transaction as opposed to maybe an analog transaction.
And I guess my next question, and I will get back to the script in a minute, Jessica, but this is interesting. Traditionally, I guess it's vulnerable populations have always been more of a threat for this. But I'm thinking if it's more technology based, is that then bringing it to the suburbs, to the middle classes, which perhaps it hadn't reached previously?
So some interesting data on that is, and this is according again to the Metropolitan Bureau of Investigation and Orlando. So the Orange, both myself and Alan Wilkett sit on the Greater Orlando Human Trafficking Task Force. And so the data I'm about to provide is provided by them. And they said the average person is trafficked within X amount of miles from their home. Can somebody take a guess of that? How far do you think people are being trafficked from their home? Corey says 3 miles. Okay, that's a good guess. Just a little bit more. Jordan says 10. Great. Laura says 5. Gaurav says 10. Very good. It's 8. 8 miles. The average individual is trafficked within 8 miles of their home. So I'll give you the exact data. 80% of victims who are recovered from sex trafficking are recovered from hotels and motels. 80%. That's why it's so important that we talk as hospitality and industry professionals, the future leaders, that we can talk about this, right? So that's just some hard data for you all to kind of see the really impact that it has, and how you guys being on this call is really, really important. Before we move on, Alan, can I share a little bit of data real quick with some of the things that we found? So myself, Dr. Fyall, Gaurav Pant, who's on the call as well, and then our colleague, Julio Ronzoli, just did some research with our law enforcement advocacies and educators, and we came up with some really great information and then some plans moving forward to help to mitigate. So I'd just like to share a little bit of that with you guys now. So some strategies that we found in the research to be able to mitigate the scale and reach and impact of human trafficking at major and mega events happens with prevention, preparation, setting precedent, and protection. All of those things working together: law enforcement, advocacy, educators, and planners. So we need to prepare the community, local law enforcement, educators, again, event planners, attendees, advocates in the potential of trafficking activities around major events. We need to then acknowledge that these activities may be happening to create adaptable training programs and advocacies for the victims, okay? We can't leave the victims behind. So this goes a long way with prevention. We have accountability for factors, activities, assessments of what's happening, and intervention to set precedent, okay? We also need to lead by example by creating templates for the work that we do in this community, including the training and development, to then export to other communities, to be a leader in trafficking. So they know, traffickers know, they're not coming to Orlando. They're not coming to Central Florida to traffic because we don't allow it here, right? So currently Central Florida, like I said, has the Greater Orlando Human Trafficking Task Force. We also have the Tri-County Alliance Task Force, for which leads exactly by example. They are creating templates for other communities to follow to combat trafficking. They're utilizing their system-wide community approach to help in that. Okay, so finally, what we can do in this call is, I know we have about 20 minutes left, but think about this while we're talking, is a call to action. We can do this by protecting the community and offering services for victims. So all of the different ancillary services we have besides law enforcement, education, and advocates are the programs that are there for victims. They need help once they've been rescued, right? So it's something to think about as well, working together with all stakeholders so that mega events that come here to Orlando come knowing we don't accept that behavior here. We're going to disrupt the process, we're going to dismantle the crew, we're not allowing it. And so implementation of these mitigation strategies can contribute to a positive legacy for mega events coming to Orlando by these, setting precedent, prevention, preparation, and protection. So that was a little bit about what we found in our research. If you want to learn more about it, we're still in the throes of having some publications, but we'll be happy to share it large and wide once it's ready to go.
Yeah, once those nasty editors accept these papers, Jessica? Yeah, it's all those nasty editors. But Jessica, what you're saying, I'm thinking, for those that aren't familiar with Orlando is a huge, everybody knows it's a theme park capital of the world in many ways, but it's a massive event destination too. It's huge, every event you can think of. And certainly one of the big items that we're waiting in the decision for, I think it comes the end of February, is whether or not Orlando will be a FIFA 2026 Soccer World Cup city. It's a candidate city, but we haven't got the final decision yet. So I guess my question, if you're promoting events in this area, how can you use the sort of preventative techniques as a sort of as a real plus? So drawing events to the city, but demonstrating what we're doing. Is that something that happens, Alan, or Dr. Davis? Is that something you're seeing? Is it a sort of, when I say a selling point, that sounds crass, but is Orlando or Central Florida promoting itself as a sort of progressive event space? Is that something that can be done?
I don't really think at this point that tagline is included. We know that Orange County officials are very aware of what's going on, and they've realized that pornography, for instance, is one of the biggest things, number one things that happens in the Orlando area or the Orange County area when folks come here. We've tried through certain task force in the past, like Daytona, to bring a preventative type action to them, and we were really rebuffed by the area because the idea of associating human trafficking with an event seems to be a negative for a lot of organizations. It's like, are we saying that participants that would come here for events at the event centers are going to have to be exposed or be in trouble with human trafficking? And so because of that, they don't really go hand in hand. So we've been working tirelessly trying to find ways to make those introductions, to let folks know that we don't tolerate that, whether it's through city ordinances or things or postings using our hospitality postings that, in the rooms that human trafficking is not tolerated. Here's the number to call, tear-offs in the bathrooms and things to get people to do that. But really up front, trying to say, hey, come here because we're fighting human trafficking. You're not getting a great consensus with that. Because people are worried about how it will affect the image, let's say, of this area.
Yeah. And Alan, can I ask you about your experience with the Super Bowl and what have you in the sort of Tampa area? To what extent do you think the community is really behind this stuff in a proactive sense, or is it quietly behind the scenes dealing with the problem? To what extent can, in many cases, a place promote itself as a very progressive?
Yeah, so I think Dr. Davis made some great points with the answer that he gave and some of those practical methods that we try to utilize. What I have found is that, and I know this is more of a long-term strategy, because if you do say, hey, we've got a Super Bowl coming to Tampa, come on, Tampa, let's really start talking about human trafficking. On the tourism side of the coin, you have some pushback because there is that, well, if we do a lot with that, we're going to kind of put ourselves out there as the sex trafficking capital of the world. And nobody wants to be known as that because you want tourists to come and obviously spend dollars in your community. What I have found is that it's much better to put long-term strategies in that says, let's educate and do preventive techniques well in advance of a Super Bowl or a wrestling event or a soccer event. Let's go ahead and start this as a community-driven effort prior to some big event. So we're not tying it to the big event, we're tying it to the community educating itself to do this. And I'll give you a case in point. One of the things that we have done is that we've talked about the triangle. So if we talk about the triangle, we also have to look at prevention from a supply and demand side. So how do we put supply preventive measures there, which would be the victim and the trafficker, and then what kind of strategies can we put in there to reduce demand? So we hit the demand side. So what kind of prevention strategies can we put together in the community to look at both sides of this coin that we call human trafficking, the supply side and the demand side? Here's what my suggestion would be. If we're looking at supply, if we identify, so supply would be, again, a pimp who has a stable, who's moving them into a community to come in prior to and to work through the soccer, the FIFA event in Orlando, if it comes to Orlando. So he brings the stable in. What interaction does the community have to be able to identify that that is indeed a stable being brought in, sex trafficking victims being brought in? Well, we need to identify high traffic corridors and bring targeted training into those high traffic corridors. So a convenience store, hotels, motels, restaurants, these are going to be those businesses along those high traffic corridors who have a brief moment of opportunity to recognize the signs and indicators that someone's being trafficked, and then make that call to law enforcement to begin that investigative process. So we need to bring targeted training into high traffic corridors that would be those abilities to identify potential trafficking victims. And then we do the demand side of that as well by going after the buyer and letting the buyer know that this isn't a good old boy criminal activity. Everybody's not doing it, and it's no longer accepted in our society. So we do that through legislative efforts like we're doing now with House Bill 1439 that was argued yesterday on the Florida House floor, which says that we're going to take the buying of sex in the state of Florida from a misdemeanor to a third-degree felony. What are we doing? We're sending message to the buyers that this is no longer going to be tolerated in the state of Florida. So we have to do long-term preventive methods along with what Dr. Davis talked about, and that's when the event's coming in, doing those very tactics that can have that short-term effect as well. So we have to look at it from strategy and tactical, long-term and short-term.
Can I jump in and say that? And thanks for saying that, Corporal Wilcott, that some of the strategies and that can be identified are mega events having training in their registration portal. They have information about trafficking and what to look for having information readily available. This is what a buyer's ad would look like. This is what it would look like. So don't attack yourself with this. These are the consequences if you are purchasing sex at this mega event. This is the jail that you will be in for the rest of this event when you're here. And that starts with the advertisement of the event. And you're exactly what Dr. Davis said. That's the barrier on a lot of these event planners is they don't want to associate trafficking with their event. But guess what? It's happening anyways. So get ahead of it and be the one that says, we're not going to accept this. So having during the registration process, information about trafficking, those different ads that come along with it. Then while you're there, having information advertised throughout the event. We do not accept trafficking. If you plan to be involved in trafficking, here are the consequences that will happen. And so those are some ways too that when we can start with the event planners, which are our future students here. And I see, Mike, you raised your hand. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this as well.
Jessica, just before we move to Mike, can I very, very quickly, just for the benefit of the Brits that are in the audience, we've mentioned about the Super Bowl 2 or 3 times. That's primarily because when we met with Alan, the Super Bowl is frequently in Florida because it's warm. Just to give you a scale of how important American football is, this weekend, 50 million Americans were watching NFL games. 50 million. So that it's not my sport, but even I was watching. It just gives you an indication of the scale. It's basically the population of England. So Mike, over to you.
Sorry, I just really wanted to chip in and say at that kind of that international event owner policy level, I think there's so many organizations that are involved in the development and organization of large scale events, and it's often a problem of many hands. There's so many organizations part of it that every single organization doesn't really think it's their responsibility. And I think that a big part of the work that we need to do, working with directly with these organizations is to mandate them to have something in their operational protocols when they hand over this thing called a host city contract to the destination that's hosting, that there needs to be something very, very directly in there about the training of staff and what the expectations are on law enforcement. And these organizations need to take a global leadership role in tackling this, not just step back and go, it's the destination's issue. No, it's their issue. Because, you know, and the second point to that is that they need to recognize that events are a double-edged sword. They exacerbate social problems. We know that, we've seen it over and over again. But they're also a way to tackle everyday social problems that are going on anyway. It just so happens that the event exacerbates what's already going on, right? And I think by framing it like that, by working with event owners, they can that will empower them to think, actually, we can use this event for more social good, but they need to kind of have that paradigm shift. I think I just wanted to say that because that is the power of events, I think.
Yeah, that you bring exactly to the global level. And I'm so glad you said that, because we do have people joining from across the pond, right, over there in Great Britain and England and across the globe. So you're exactly right. Thank you for saying that. It has to start in the programming, in their standard operating procedures for host cities. This is what our expectations are. I have to call out really quick and really fun. So, and Dr. Davis can confirm this, we're in a bid, right, for the FIFA World Cup. Everybody knows that. Alan said that a minute ago. So one of the things that the planning committee asked, what are your policies on trafficking? What are you doing in this community to combat trafficking? And so, Dr. Davis, were you part of that conversation with Tomas? And maybe you could give a little extra feedback.
Well, I wasn't part of the exact conversation, but I did talk with Tomas, and there's always a concern as to what will be done, what can be done. And one thing that we can say in the area over here is working with who you've alluded to several times, Metropolitan Bureau of Investigations, or MBI as we call it. We've got proactive means of going out. In other words, we're not trying to facilitate or put something together for a particular event. We're doing something ongoing because it's our community here, because there are other events that are always going on 24/7 in this area. And this area has a great, the word that always comes to me when I think of what we're doing is called collaboration. The collaborative effort of all the different organizations. Oftentimes you don't get law enforcement and NGOs and not-for-profits and other government organizations working together on the same scale. Here in Orange County and over here in Brevard, we do communicate, we do foster, we do, facilitate information on a continual basis by, dealing individually with the hospitality, the hotels in the area, letting them know that it's part of their social responsibility. And then working with the other organizations. And we do have hotlines. We've got people in the mental health organizations, even such things as tattoo parlors, anyone that can assist in some capacity in the rescue or the restoration of people. And on the preventive arm is where we need to do more in terms of legislation. But in this area, we've got continuous activity going on. So for anybody to come in and say, well, what do you all have? It's not like, well, we have to get something together. We've been working, we can show them through statistical data, we can show them through prosecutions or whatever they're looking for, that we're constantly working on this effort all the time.
I love that you say that, and that's why it's so good for this. I'm going to mute you because I'm hearing a lot of feedback. I'm sorry, Dr. Davis, but okay, perfect. So it's something that you bring apart, and that's why we're having these conversations with everyone, is that you're right, collaboration is where it's at. And we're not being reactive to an event coming, we're being proactive in this community. And that's where everybody can come together, and where Mike is on the other side of the pond, coming together, and us here on our side, because we're going to be proactive. We're going to have these systems and policies in place so that when we can come and host great events and be able to, combat and mitigate trafficking. So I just wanted to throw that soapbox in about the FIFA World Cup, which we hope we get. Yes, we hope we get.
Yeah, we want the Irish here. We want some fun. We want the Irish here.
We do, we do.
Yeah. Jessica, we've got about 7 or 8 minutes. I think it's a really good time to open up to Gaurav and all our friends on screen for any questions to either the organizers or myself, Mike, Jessica, our guest Alan, or Dr. Davis. Any questions at all?
Yeah, questions or comments or anything you want to chime in. Oh, Maria, thanks.
Yeah, can I just want to thank for a really interesting presentation and a really interesting talk. I'm from Sweden, where we have a different law. We have the Nordic model here in Sweden, where prostitution is legal, but it's illegal to buy sexual services. So it's a bit different. But I'm doing research on this topic, and it's really interesting to hear a sort of a US-based discussion. And I came across a really interesting US research where they've used artificial intelligence to sort of go through these online forums where they sell or where they sort of put up ads. And I thought it was really interesting. Is that something that you have been in contact with, Alan or Jessica or Anthony?
I haven't seen. I struggle working Zoom, Maria, so artificial intelligence is beyond me. But I think the serious response is the one thing I think Alan alluded to it earlier on. The increasing high-tech nature will drive far more research in this area. I think we talk about smart places, smart cities, smart destinations. I think that's part and parcel of these sort of issues will become integral to those things as you move on, because you can't. It's in no city or destination's interest to get a reputation for these sort of things. So it's in everybody's benefit at the end of the day.
And the only thing that I would mention to that is that thank you for that, because we are using AI. The AI that we're using has the ability to scrub those websites, especially those websites that we know has a propensity for the advertisement of sex workers or sex trafficking. And I could mention probably a dozen of them but they'll scrub those, look for ads. But the other thing that is interesting in that is that it also is putting ads out there that are being driven from the AI side that would have the components to what you would see an actual ad, and letting the buyers respond to that ad, and then being able to track the buyer by responding to the ad, especially after they know that it's being advertised as a 14-year-old girl or a 13-year-old boy, and then that buyer beginning that interaction, and then being able to pick up the phone data, being able to do an investigative process. So yes, AI is really beginning to take a big part of the law enforcement effort in particular. And you're seeing a lot of police agencies employ the AI on that side, because it can do the work of thousands of manpower. It can do the work in that, and then it hands it off to a detective at some point in time to continue that investigation. But yes, that ad that you mentioned is absolutely true, and we're seeing a lot of that being employed in U.S. law enforcement.
Lovely. Thank you, Maria. And Jonathan, I can see your hand up. Jonathan,
yeah, thank you very much. A very sort of powerful topic, and it was really useful having you sort of speaking from the coalface, so to speak. I've done some festival work in Madagascar, and this is an image in my sort of virtual background of what was on the hotel doors and the lifts and then the lobbies, because there was a lot of human trafficking. And it seemed to be, it was a shock for me because it was the first time I'd sort of come face to face with it. I wondered about sort of hearing from the participants about different types of human trafficking, in the sense that it sounds like this, what you were talking about was very much a sort of a grooming version, whereas the ones that I was experiencing, I think, in Madagascar was more about the family, and it was out of poverty, and it was within the family. So I was very struck by that sort of periphery, that it's very close to home, and yet you were talking more about grooming, which I thought, for me, I initially thought was going to be more international, whereas the one I experienced was very close to home, because it was the parents actually advocating sort of their children being sort of farmed out locally.
So go ahead, Alan. Yeah, hop on in.
No, I'm sorry. I just jumped in, and I'll say it very quickly, Jessica, so that you can kind of wrap that answer up. But familial trafficking, which is families trafficking their own members, is one of the fastest growing reported side of that we're seeing here in the U.S. It is unbelievable how fast that's growing, where we're seeing familial trafficking or the trafficking within a family unit. I think the other thing, kind of falling back on what Jessica said earlier, is even in the U.S. State Department's TIP report, which is an annual report that's done, the Trafficking in Persons report. I would encourage you to read it. It's awesome. It's a fantastic report. But it directly, for the last 2 years, has directly made this reference that trafficking is happening by and far. The largest percentage of trafficking is happening in the countries of origin. So in other words, there is cross-national trafficking. We all know that, cross-border trafficking. But most trafficking is now being reported in the country of origin. So we're seeing a lot of, and use a term, homegrown trafficking, and familial trafficking within that is one of the fastest growing in the reporting side.
Thank you for bringing up that, Alan. And it is, I know we've only got 2 minutes left. I want to give the last question to Gaurav, who is a Rosen College alum and also a very dear friend of ours here on the call. But I want to address just 2 things. Juliana asked, do you believe the event advertisement can play a role in building the good health, social responsibility expectation on the attendee? 100% yes. Yes, it can. And it's been proven as everybody that we've talked to. And then Jessica asked about how many cities are prepared. We don't know that data right now because human trafficking is the most underreported crime. But what we do know is we work with other cities. We have the Greater Orlando Human Trafficking Task Force. We work with the Greater New Orleans Trafficking Task Force. We work with some task force in Las Vegas, but it's very siloed. We have to do something to change that. And that's where we start on these types of initiatives. Gaurav, I'll let you close this out, and thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Jessica. It's a great discussion so far. My question quickly is about the ethical hiring process in the events to reduce human trafficking. What transformation on policy level and on advocacy level do you all believe should happen so that the hiring process is ethical for temporary workers, vulnerable population working on the front lines in the events, living standards, working standards, minimum payments, other health benefits. So just an open hiring process question. Thank you.
So Gaurav, I'm so glad you asked that. And that's something that we talk about because we are a tier 1 destination organization, tier 1 destination city. So sometimes we're very busy, but most of the time we're just really busy, right? It's always busy. So organizations, hotels, motels, restaurants, things like that, they have the same hiring process for their employees. When they hire outside vendors, third-party vendors to staff those positions, they need to mandate they go through the same human resources vetting process that all other employees do. But what does that look like in mega events and big events is that they're just hiring in people for a one-time event. Yeah. You're right. What are the policies and procedures? And it hasn't caught up. So it's conversations like this to say we have to have these policies and procedures in place so that we're protecting the event, the people who are working at events. So with that, we're out of time. This has been such a great conversation. I want to thank you all for joining. I know that Alan will say his goodbyes and so will Mike. And I want to leave you with some data that's really hard to hear, but you need to know it and why it's important to be a human trafficking advocate. The average person who is trafficked for sex is raped an average of 6,000 times. So we have to put a stop to it. We have to end the demand for the buyers and put a stop to the traffickers and save people out there. The average age of a female trafficked is 15 to 17, and a male is 14 to 16. There are vulnerable populations, our foster care children, our LGBTQ community, and we have to protect them. That's what I want to say. So thank you all for being advocates on this call. It was a pleasure to talk with all of you today. Thank you, Alan Wilkett. Thank you, Dr. Anthony Davis. Thank you, Dr. Michael Dugnan and Dr. Alan Fyall. If you want to say anything else to close out, I just want to say thank you.
To be honest, Jessica, I think your numbers say it all. I don't think there's anything else to say. I think that they're profoundly disturbing, and I think let's close on that, and that will stay in people's minds.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think we've all got something to to contribute to. I think education, universities, embedding all this kind of education in universities is key. So just a quick plug for the next event. The next event's on February the 23rd. That's entitled Diversity and Inclusion in Conference and Events. And we're right next to London, but obviously you guys in Florida, conferences, MICE tourism, that sort of thing is such a big part of the economy. So this will have kind of some resonance for you guys. And Yanning, who's on the call, this is going to be based on a project that we've done with an organization. So maybe Yanning, just a quick 30 seconds in terms of what the focus of the talk might be.
Very quickly, but to be honest, I really want to say thank you for these amazing discussions, because my mind is still with this topic. So it's really inspiring. So for the next talk that we are going to host, so we are going to present some interesting findings from our project looking at diversity and inclusivity within the event industry in the UK, with a focus on corporate events. So slightly different, but still quite important, because we touch upon social justice and all these equality issues. So hopefully we'll be able to discuss with you on the next topic.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Excellent. On that note, thank you very much, everybody, whether you're this side or the other side of the pond. And Dr. Davis and Alan in particular, thank you very much for joining us. Have a good afternoon. Have a good evening, everybody. And in Orlando, stay warm.
Our pleasure. Thank you.
Hey, guys.